episode of the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. It's a bonus episode of the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Come on now!
Well, that's the bonus episode song. Those of you who were with me for the last series that we did on Matthew, you know that one. You've heard it. You've walked around the house humming that while doing chores and wondering why it's still stuck in your brain. For those of you who are new, congratulations. Now you've heard the bonus episode song. Just so everybody's on the same page, bonus episodes are ones that we do on the weekend. We just put up whenever that don't quite fit format-wise into what we do with our regular episodes, but I got some stuff that I want to cover and it's got to go somewhere, so it's going here. I don't really hold myself to a tight time limit on bonus episodes, which I find refreshing because I get to take the foot off the gas a little bit and not worry about getting just everything I can in within a pretty tight time frame. What I want to talk about in this conversation is just a summary, a big overview of the basic details, broad strokes of everything we've covered so far up to the end of 2 Chronicles, because we're almost to the end of the historical books, and it's just so much. And I don't want you to lose it, because the point of this exercise is for you to quickly and succinctly level up your understanding of the Bible as one big coherent document. But we're getting hit with a lot of information very quickly. And so from time to time, I want to pause and be like, all right, let's just solidify what we already have here so that we keep the levels up that we've earned. But before we do that, I would just like to talk about my experience for a moment, because there's no time for that in these episodes as we're cruising through, or not much anyway. I am having so much fun, and I am learning so very, very much. I don't know that I've ever read this much Bible this quickly. And I cannot believe how much time I just put into Ezra and Nehemiah. Those are very short books, but man, I went through them a lot over and over and over again. I was like, oh, well, how does this fit together? The timeline gets a little bit weird here. How does this work? And maybe some of you know that the next book series we're going to do is on Esther. When we're done with this, we're going to dive deep into the book of Esther. And Esther is set in Persia in the same way that Ezra and Nehemiah are set in Persia. So I have done a ton of work trying to remember stuff from school and also just really, really dig into Persian history and trying to catch the nuance and the details and the little stuff before we take a close look at Esther. And so it made it really fun to go and read Ezra and Nehemiah for the first time since I've done all of this Persia work that I've been doing for basically the last year now in anticipation of Esther. So this has just been incredibly meaningful for me. I'm seeing nuance and color and shades that I've just never seen in the Bible before. And I've never looked at Matthew as closely as we just got done looking at it together. So I've also got that in the back of my head as we're going through the Old Testament. I'm like, oh, everything rhymes. Everything fits together. It's like 100 layers of completion and connection that I'd never thought about or known, that I'm catching way more of this time around. And that's exciting to me, because I thought I knew the Bible fairly well before we started doing this. And now I'm like, whoa, dang, there's tons more than I thought. Well, if I thought I knew it fairly well and I'm learning this much more on this trip through, then I should stay excited and frosty, because next time through, it means there's going to be even more stuff. This is just truly a remarkable document that has the fingerprints of the maker of all things all over it. I like reading. I like books. I like literature from the ancient world. I'm a history guy. I mean, kind of for a job, I'm a history guy. It's what I went to school for first and theology second. And I've read gallons and gallons of stuff written in centuries, even millennia past, and just nothing works like the Bible. I hope this series is whatever it needs to be for wherever you're at in your process, but man, I love the freedom that comes with the way we're able to approach this together. I love the freedom that comes with announcing in advance, like, hey, the bottom line of the podcast is not to get you to sign up for exactly my church or version of Christianity. I'm coming at this thing as tabula rasa as possible, and I know a bunch of you are doing the same thing. And so it's cool that we just don't have that pressure between us to be like, hey, say exactly the right thing here, have the right opinion, or we're through. I feel that grace and that freedom to explore and discover for myself and share it with you from you, and it means a lot. So thanks. But it is frustrating. I mean, this Ezra and Nehemiah thing that I just got done recording, it's not out yet as you're hearing this particular episode, but I'm done with those two. I just could have gone for weeks and weeks and weeks on the extra biblical history there and all the places where it overlaps, like all these kings, Cyrus and Darius and Artaxerxes, and we just get passing mention to Ahasuerus or Xerxes as he's known in Esther. But all of these kings, there's so much history, there's so much recorded about them that we know what pressures they were under. We can kind of triangulate what they must have been thinking. We know them so well that we know their personalities. It's like we're just seeing history all of a sudden as we get to Ezra and Nehemiah in so much more color. And that is exhilarating for me. And it's probably the maximum moment where I've felt the frustration of, I wish we were doing like a 15-year series going through all the books of the Bible in order. But we're doing it this way. It's going to pay big dividends as we go and explore other books of the Bible. And I'm having fun. And so thank you for indulging me and letting me talk about the process I've gone through here and how I am feeling about it. Now, let's talk about big picture of the story that we've been looking at. The Bible opens with nothing. God makes existence out of non-existence, and we get this scene in the garden where humanity falls. God decides he's going to redeem it. Then we get the primeval portion of Genesis, right? Remember this, the almost prehistory stuff that tells these big tales about how the breaking of creation, the damaging of humanity, the people made in God's image, how that's affecting everything and how people just cannot solve it themselves or get out of their own way. Then the second half of Genesis introduces us to a human character. The scope is narrowed. We pinch zoom in on Abraham, and then we follow his family. We discover quickly his best thing is that he believes God, but he has a bunch of other character flaws. His descendants have all kinds of character flaws, but it's not about them. God makes an unconditional promise to Abraham that there's going to be one who that serpent is going to strike at, but ultimately all of the curse is going to be crushed by this one who is vaguely alluded to in Genesis as being to come. We learn more about that when God tells Abraham that there's going to be a blessing for all the nations that comes out of his descendants and this great people he's going to make from Abraham. And from there on out, what we see are constant reminders that this redemptive plan is owned by God and only carried forward because of the persistence and faithfulness and grace and long view of God, and that it's carried out in spite of people, including the people who at least ostensibly claim to serve God. We're also going to see playing out all kinds of moments where it looks like there's just no way this plan can still work out. It's broken, it's wrecked, forget it, it's shot. And then it keeps working out. It keeps just sneaking out of the Death Star just as it explodes. And, okay, the redemptive plan moves forward. Oh no, the redemptive plan is down to the last man. But he finds a way to escape as the enemy closes in and gets to regroup, and the redemptive plan moves forward. Oh no, the redemptive plan is at death's door, sick and frail, but at the last minute, the redemptive plan pulls through. And we see this ebb and flow as we go through the Old Testament history books and see how it's almost like God is stacking the deck of history against himself to make it clear that this redemptive plan is his and his alone, and that he is the only reason that it's being seen through. In Exodus, all of Abraham's descendants who had found favor in Egypt are forgotten. The new Pharaoh there has just moved on. And in a terrible reversal of fortune, the Israelites, did I call them Jewish a minute ago? That's a bit anachronistic, whatever. The Israelites are now slaves. It looks like the redemptive plan is shot. He just ended up an ancient Near Eastern people group, forgotten, who died as slaves in some foreign land. But nope, God delivers the people. using flawed leaders and gigantic miraculous signs that are assigned to all the people, those who like Israel and those who don't. They all see, whoa, their God looks like that. That's the real God. And they cross the Red Sea and they go out into the desert, and God reveals himself and gives the law and starts to set up the ground rules of what it's going to look like for there to be a relationship between a very flawed people group and an infinite, flawless God. I mean, it makes sense. It would take a minute to explain that. That's a pretty strange union. Well, in the meantime, the patience of the people runs out. Like, we can't even wait to hear what the terms of this are. We want to worship gods that are predictable, like this here golden calf. And still, despite their immediate idolatry, God still persists with them, lays out the law, and physically guides his chosen people toward the promised land of Canaan. But when they get there, despite all they've seen, they're like, nah, I don't want to do it. And we're not going to go in. Doesn't feel like a good idea. And so God's like, okie dokie. Well, then every last one of you from this generation is going to die. And then and only then will I take the next generation in. And that's what happens. So old man Moses renews the covenant, sitting outside the promised land, waiting for all of the generation from Egypt to die off. And with the covenant renewed and Moses now dead, Joshua takes command, and into the Holy Land we go. And it is violent and bloody and frightening at times. But the conquest goes mostly well under the leadership of Joshua from an Israelite redemptive plan perspective. From the Canaanites who melted their babies to appease their gods, it didn't go so well. I think it was a very disappointing conquest from their perspective. But not all of them. Some of the Canaanites were allowed to hang around, and that theme is recurring through Judges and 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, because even as old man Joshua now, with the conquest mostly done, effectively renews the covenant again and then dies, the Israelites just can't help themselves, and they want to be like their neighbors. They want their God to be more like the petty Canaanite gods. They even offer their own children as sacrifices in some of the most extreme circumstances, in the style of what the Canaanites did for their God. And so then we get this several 100-year era of the judges where everybody does whatever they see fit in their own eyes. There is no king. The judges aren't even really particularly impressive. And even though they're very flawed, God still uses the massively flawed people who he has at his disposal. But almost none of the judges provide us with any indication that they understood the character of God, and it's a horrible, deeply dark time where the redemptive plan looks like it's gone off the rails. God has redeemed his people. He led them out of slavery. He led them through the desert. He even continued with the redemptive plan after they effectively rejected his leadership out there in the wilderness. And now you've got a land, and you've got the land divided up, and you've got God as your king, but it's not good enough for them, and they embrace the Canaanite practices and reject the ways of God, reject the law of God. And Judges is an absolute dumpster fire with almost no glimmers of hope, except for the little aside that we get during the era of the Judges with the story of Ruth and Boaz and their descendants Obed, Jesse, and then David. The split book of Samuel takes us through the story of one who's effectively the last of the judges, Samuel and his sons, and into the era of the kings. And the people want a king in part because of the failure of Samuel's sons, their injustice. It's just a continuation of the cycles of the judges. And they're like, let's just break the cycle. Let's do a king like everybody else has. And Samuel's like, not such a good idea. And they're like, cool, we want one anyway. And so God gives them a king. No longer in a practical sense will God be their monarch, but some dude is going to be. And those some dudes do everything Samuel warned them they would do as kings and more. And we're only able to retain relative stability for a couple of generations of this monarchy. Saul starts great, spirals into ruin. David, who, when God rejects Saul as king and has David anointed to be the next king, David starts out pretty strong, speed wobbles really hard in the middle, gets some stuff right later on, and then has a mixed conclusion, handing off instructions to his son Solomon on his deathbed. Well, in the midst of all of that, though, God makes another promise that is unconditional to David. There's going to be this great line of kings, and there's going to be a great king who will sit on the throne and will reign forever, and it's unconditional. David is going to be an idiot, but God is going to see the redemptive plan through the line of David one way or another. But that gets hard to picture after David dies and his son starts off strong, but then falls into the same trap of looking too much like his Canaanite pagan neighbors and doesn't end so hot. But what Solomon does achieve is he builds a grand temple to the Lord, and God shows up. It's physically evident that God miraculously showed up and dwelt in the temple amongst his chosen people. But the monarchy does not survive Solomon's descendants, and civil war breaks out, and 10 of the tribes run off to the north to say, yeah, we're going to do our own thing. We're going to have our own kingdom up here. That is an unmitigated disaster from beginning to end. And what turns out to be described as only 2 tribes remain in the south, Judah and Benjamin. And there we at least see some good kings. It's more hit and miss there, and even the good kings make a lot of mistakes. And in 1st and 2nd Kings, those mistakes of the southern kings are more heavily emphasized, where in 1st and 2nd Chronicles, the successes, the changes of heart after a mistake here or there are more heavily emphasized amongst those kings of the south. God sends prophets like Elijah and Elisha who interact with the kings of the north and the south, and particularly a lot of the rebukes are directed at the north. And after Elijah and Elisha, there's a whole lot of other, I guess what we call more minor prophets who come along and speak to one atrocity or one particular king or one particular moment of error in the history of the people of Israel or even Judah. But ultimately, all of that prophesying toward the northern kingdom is for naught. They do not listen over the long haul, and the dreaded Assyrians come in and conquer the northern kingdom and set it to ruin entirely in 722 BC. Now they're just gone. That happens in Kings. Well, all that's left now is the southern kingdom, and they actually hold out for quite a while longer, another 140 years, until they get crossways with the empire who defeated the Assyrians, these being the Babylonians. And the Babylonians show up, and they are not messing around. They destroy Jerusalem. They destroy the temple, brick from brick. They wreck it completely. They leave only a few poor people behind to tend the land, reduce Judah to a nothing backwater, and take pretty much everybody away toward modern-day Iraq, Baghdad, Babylon, into captivity. And it's there that we get the stories of King Nebuchadnezzar and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that we haven't covered yet, and Daniel that we haven't covered yet. But the Babylonians aren't in charge for very long. They get their judgment day in 539 BC when Cyrus the Great of Persia shows up and deposes the last king of the Babylonians, Nabonidus. And the Persians, they take a totally different approach. They're like, all right, we're not going to go with the iron fist. We're going to go with more like a smoothly carved wooden fist. It's still a fist and it would still hurt, but we want you to like us. So the brand new king of the world, Cyrus the Great, issues a decree at the end of 2nd Chronicles that says, all right, you exiles, go on back up with the blessing of the king, the resources even of the king of Persia, to rebuild your capital city, to rebuild your temple. And so as you can see several times through there, it looks like God's chosen people blew it so badly that maybe there's just no way for this thing to work out. But all those glimmers of hope keep paying off. God preserves the redemptive plan. God preserves his people through whom he promised unconditionally to bless all the nations. And now, as we get to the end of 2nd Chronicles, we can see more than a glimmer of hope. We can see a straight up pathway for how this might get back on track. And in Ezra and Nehemiah, we're going to see how that actually plays out and what goes in to the process of unwrecking something beautiful that had been wrecked and getting this thing back on track. Hopefully that's helpful for you. It's helpful for me to just sit down at the microphone and get it all out there and run through the whole list of things. And the story is one cohesive unit. I cannot stress enough how much fun I'm having and how grateful I am to you for making it go. I've also seen that a bunch of you have done a couple of things. A bunch of you have gone and written reviews of late on various podcasting apps. That is the most helpful thing ever. Short of straight up inviting a friend who you know in the real world That's the most helpful thing for getting this in front of other people. Those ratings and reviews are huge, and they're fun to read, and they're kind. I've read every word of those. Thank you so much to everybody who's taken a minute to write something like that. It's pretty cool. You make me blush. I appreciate you. Also, as you know, this podcast only exists because there are people who support the program. Most of the support that happens on this podcast is through patreon.com/the TMBH podcast, which we always link down in the show notes. Those patrons do the heavy lifting to make this thing go, and you know who you are. I know who you are, and I'm super, super, super grateful to you. But I'm also grateful to the people who have more recently started supporting on Planning Center. You can get to that by going to, thetmbh.com/support. And there are other options there other than Patreon for support. And I know that lots of you have kicked in those ways. And obviously I am equally ludicrously grateful to everybody who does it that way. The point is this: you are making it so that I can support my family and make this thing go while just throwing tons and tons of time at the Bible and trying to make sense of this and distill it down to something that can fit into all the things you have going on with your life. And so to all of you who listen to this and don't support, awesome. It's free. You don't have to. It's not like a premium membership. Everybody's here and it's great. To those of you who, for whatever reason, have felt prompted to do so, just wow. I'm beyond grateful for the opportunity that you've given me. Thank you. And with that, that's all my things. Happy bonus episode. Thanks for reviewing it with me. We'll pick it up. What do we have next? I think we've got Ezra and Nehemiah next up, probably, or whatever it is. I'm sure it'll be fun. All right. We'll see you next time around. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.